The marble halls of the Galactic Council had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations for over 10,000 years. Today they would witness something unprecedented. The complete and utter humiliation of the galaxy's most powerful governing body. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire adjusted his breathing apparatus nervously as he reviewed the datapad in his four-fingered hands. The readings made no sense. According to every sensor, every probe, every long-range scanner they had deployed toward the Sol system, humanity should not exist. Not anymore. The Void Devourers had been released into their system 3 solar cycles ago. Massive, self-replicating constructs designed to consume entire star systems and leave nothing but empty space behind. They were the Council's ultimate sanction, used only when a species posed an existential threat to galactic order. Yet here stood Dr. Elena Vasquez, a human diplomat, calmly sipping what she called coffee from a ceramic cup, as if she hadn't just traveled from a system that should have been completely devoid of matter. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she wore a plain blue dress that somehow managed to look elegant despite its simplicity. What disturbed Kethvar most was her smile, not the nervous grimace of a survivor, but the confident expression of someone who held all the cards in a game others didn't even know they were playing. "You seem surprised to see me, Ambassador Kethvar," Elena said, setting her cup down on the crystalline conference table with a soft clink. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the vast chamber where representatives from 47 species sat in stunned silence. Supreme Chancellor Vorix, a towering insectoid being whose species had ruled the galaxy for 3 millennia, leaned forward on his throne-like chair. His compound eyes reflected the chamber's ambient light as he spoke in the harmonic tones that his kind used for formal occasions. "Human representative, our instruments clearly show that we deployed Void Devourers to your system. These constructs have never failed to completely eradicate all matter within a star system. How do you exist?" Elena's smile widened. "Oh, those things? They were fascinating. Our physicists had a field day studying them. We particularly enjoyed the part where they tried to unmake our sun. Did you know that stellar matter behaves very differently when you convince it that it exists in a parallel dimension where the strong nuclear force works backwards?" The silence that followed was deafening. Kethvar felt his breathing apparatus working overtime as his species' equivalent of panic set in. The Void Devourers weren't just weapons. They were applications of the fundamental forces that held reality together. They worked by convincing matter that it had never existed, retroactively editing it out of the universe. To suggest that humans had not only survived them but studied them was like claiming they had dissected the concept of mathematics itself. "Impossible," whispered Counselor Yexhai from the crystalline species known as the Thoughtweavers. Her translucent form flickered with disbelief. "The Void Devourers operate on principles that predate our oldest civilizations. They manipulate the base code of reality itself." "Yes, they do," Elena agreed cheerfully. "Though they're rather crude in their implementation. It's like watching someone try to perform surgery with a sledgehammer. We've developed much more elegant solutions." She reached into a small bag at her side and withdrew what appeared to be a simple glass marble. As she placed it on the table, several representatives instinctively leaned away. The marble seemed ordinary enough. Clear glass with swirls of blue and green that reminded Kethvar of planetary atmospheres, yet something about it made his survival instincts scream warnings. "This," Elena said, gently rolling the marble toward the center of the table, "contains a pocket universe. Inside it, we've recreated the Void Devourer technology and improved it. The universe inside this marble is approximately the size of your average solar system, and it's running a continuous loop of creation and destruction that generates about as much energy as a small star." Supreme Chancellor Vorix's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. "You claim to have created a universe. Do you expect us to believe—" He stopped mid-sentence as Elena casually reached out and picked up the marble. As her fingers closed around it, the chamber's lights dimmed noticeably. Every piece of advanced technology in the room, from the quantum communication arrays to the gravitational field generators that kept the station stable, flickered and struggled to maintain function. "Sorry about that," Elena said, releasing the marble. The technology immediately stabilized. "Pocket universes tend to leak a bit of exotic energy. We're still working on the containment protocols." Kethvar's breathing apparatus was now making mechanical wheezing sounds as his body struggled to cope with what he was seeing. The technology required to create a stable pocket universe was theoretical even among the Council's most advanced member species. The architects, who had built the ring worlds, had tried for millennia to create stable pocket dimensions larger than a briefcase. The power requirements alone should have been impossible for any species to generate, let alone contain. How? The question came from Ambassador Silkar of the Machine Collective, a species of artificial intelligences that had long ago transcended their biological origins. Their representative was a sleek humanoid form composed of liquid metal that shifted and flowed as they spoke. Our calculations show that the energy requirements for universe creation exceed the total output of a galactic cluster. Elena's expression grew thoughtful. Well, that's assuming you're working within the normal parameters of this universe. We learned pretty quickly that if you want to do interesting things, you need to step outside the box a bit. She gestured to the viewing ports that showed the star-filled void beyond the council station. You see, you're all thinking about energy and matter as if they're finite resources bound by the laws of thermodynamics, but those laws only apply within a single universal framework. Once you learn how to work with multiple frameworks simultaneously, the marble on the table began to glow softly. As it did, the space around it seemed to bend and twist in ways that hurt to look at directly. Kethvar's eyes began to water as his brain struggled to process geometry that simply shouldn't exist. Multiple frameworks, repeated Chancellor Vorik slowly. You speak of parallel universes as if they were tools in a workshop, aren't they? Elena asked innocently. I mean, once you figure out how to punch holes between realities, you realize that the multiverse is basically an infinite energy source. Every universe where the laws of physics work slightly differently. Every reality where the fundamental constants have different values. They're all just different ways to solve the same problems. She picked up her coffee cup again and took another sip. For instance, in a universe where the speed of light is about twice what it is here, you can create some really interesting particle interactions. And in realities where quantum mechanics work in reverse, you can do some fascinating things with causality. The assembled representatives sat in stunned silence. Kethvar realized that his hands were shaking as the full implications of what Elena was describing sank in. They weren't just talking about advanced technology. They were talking about beings who had learned to rewrite the fundamental rules of existence itself. Counselor Thexrim from the ancient eternal species, beings who had existed since the galaxy's formation and had been considered the pinnacle of cosmic wisdom, spoke in a voice that carried the weight of eons. You describe impossibilities as if they were mundane engineering problems. No species in the galaxy's recorded history has achieved what you claim. Elena set down her cup and looked directly at the ancient being. With respect, Counselor Texrim, that's probably because you're all thinking too small. You're trying to work within the universe instead of working with it. It's like the difference between being a passenger on a ship and being the person who decides where ships are allowed to exist. She stood up and walked to one of the viewing ports. Beyond the transparent aluminum, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, seemingly unchanged since the birth of civilization. You know what humans realized about a century ago? The universe isn't a closed system. It's more like an interface. A way for consciousness to interact with existence itself. And once you understand that consciousness and reality are just different aspects of the same phenomenon, she turned back to face the council, and for a moment, Kethvar could have sworn he saw something vast and incomprehensible looking out through her human eyes. Well, let's just say that the distinction between what's possible and what's impossible becomes rather meaningless. The marble on the table pulsed once, and for an instant every being in the chamber felt something that defied description, a sense of standing at the edge of an infinite abyss that was somehow also the source of all light. Then the moment passed, and Elena was just a human woman in a blue dress again. But I'm getting ahead of myself, she said, returning to her seat with the casual air of someone who hadn't just casually redefined the nature of reality. You called this meeting to discuss what you termed humanity's dangerous expansion into council space. I assume you're referring to the fact that we've established colonies in 17 star systems that you consider your territory? Chancellor Vorks managed to find his voice, though it came out as more of a whisper than his usual commanding tone. Those systems were claimed by council member species thousands of years ago. Your presence there violates every treaty and law that governs civilized space. Ah, Elena nodded understandingly. Yes, I can see how that would be confusing. You see, when we established those colonies, we made sure they were in star systems that were technically unoccupied. Impossible, Kethvar finally managed to say. We have detailed surveys of every system in that sector. All of them contain established civilizations. Elena's smile returned. Well, yes, they do now. But when we established our colonies, they were completely empty. We just chose to establish them in slightly different versions of those star systems. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Kethvar felt his world tilting as his mind struggled to process what she was saying. Different versions, he repeated numbly. Parallel realities, Elena confirmed cheerfully. We found versions of those star systems where the local species had never evolved, or had gone extinct millions of years ago, or had never existed at all. Then we simply established our colonies there and encouraged those realities to converge with this one. She gestured casually, as if she were discussing the weather rather than the casual manipulation of fundamental reality. It's really quite elegant. We get the colonies we need, and your member species get to keep their territories. Everyone wins. Except, Chancellor Vorik said slowly, that suggests you have the ability to merge alternate realities at will. Well, not at will, Elena said modestly. It takes considerable preparation and coordination. But yes, we've gotten quite good at it. We've found it's much more efficient than traditional terraforming. The chamber fell silent again as the full horror of humanity's capabilities sank in. They weren't just technologically advanced, they were operating on a level that made the Council's greatest achievements look like stone tools. The ability to manipulate alternate realities meant that humans could essentially rewrite history itself, creating any outcome they desired by simply choosing a timeline where it had already happened. Kethvar's breathing apparatus was making alarming sounds as his body finally began to shut down from shock. Around him, other representatives were showing similar signs of distress. The Thought Weavers were flickering erratically, their crystalline forms struggling to maintain coherence. The machine representatives had gone completely still, their processing systems apparently overwhelmed by trying to calculate the implications of what they'd learned. Elena looked around the chamber with what appeared to be genuine concern. Oh dear, I hope I haven't upset anyone. I really did just come here to discuss our expansion plans. We want to be good neighbors, after all. She reached into her bag again and withdrew what looked like a small crystalline device. As she activated it, a soothing field of energy washed over the chamber, immediately stabilizing everyone's biological and technological systems. Reality stabilizer, she explained. We've found that beings who aren't used to multidimensional thinking sometimes have adverse reactions to our technology. This should help everyone feel more comfortable. Indeed, Kethvar found that his breathing had returned to normal and his panic had subsided to merely overwhelming terror. Around the chamber, other representatives were also recovering their composure, though they all maintained the shell-shocked expressions of beings who had just learned that everything they thought they knew about the universe was laughably inadequate. Supreme Chancellor Vorik struggled to reassert his authority. Even if what you claim is true, the Council cannot simply allow an unregulated species to expand through our territory. There must be laws, agreements, protocols. Oh, absolutely, Elena agreed. That's exactly why I'm here. Humanity would very much like to establish formal diplomatic relations with the Council. We think there's enormous potential for mutual cooperation. She gestured to the marble on the table, which was still glowing softly with impossible energies. For instance, we'd be happy to share some of our more basic technologies. I'm sure your member species could find uses for unlimited energy, matter replication, faster-than-light communication, and modest reality manipulation capabilities. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones, not the silence of shock, but the silence of beings trying to comprehend benefits that were literally beyond their ability to imagine. What? Counselor Yexai asked carefully. Would humanity want in return? Elena's expression grew thoughtful. Well, that's where things get interesting. You see, humanity has moved beyond most traditional concerns, like resources or territory. When you can create universes, scarcity becomes rather meaningless. What we're interested in is something much more valuable. She stood up and walked to the center of the chamber, her simple human form somehow commanding the attention of beings who ruled star empires. We want stories. The non sequitur hung in the air like a challenge to sanity itself. Stories? Kethvar managed to ask. Experiences, histories, cultures, perspectives, Elena clarified. Every species in this galaxy has spent millions of years developing unique ways of understanding existence. The Zephyrians' mathematical poetry, the Thought Weavers' crystalline philosophy, the Eternal's perspective on cosmic time, these are treasures that can't be created or replicated. They can only be shared. She turned in a slow circle, making eye contact with representatives from across the known galaxy. Humanity has gained the ability to reshape reality itself, but we've realized that power without perspective is meaningless. We can create infinite universes, but we need infinite ways of understanding what those universes mean. For the first time since Elena had arrived, Chancellor Vorik seemed to regain some of his composure. You're proposing a cultural exchange. Among other things, Elena nodded. We'd like to establish embassy stations in major systems, create cultural exchange programs, and participate in council activities. In return, we'll share technologies that will benefit everyone and help protect the galaxy from external threats. External threats? Kethvar asked. Elena's expression grew serious for the first time since her arrival. Oh yes. Once you learn to see across multiple realities, you discover that our galaxy isn't alone. There are other things out there. Things that make the Void Devourers look like children's toys. Things that exist in the spaces between realities and feed on the collapse of entire dimensional clusters. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees as the assembled representatives contemplated threats that made their greatest fears look trivial. But that's a conversation for another day, Elena said, her cheerful demeanor returning. For now, I'd simply like to establish whether the Council is interested in recognizing humanity as a potential member species. Chancellor Vorix looked around the chamber at his fellow representatives. The political implications were staggering. How did you integrate a species that could rewrite the laws of physics into a governmental structure that was based on those same laws? How did you regulate beings who could step outside of reality itself? On the other hand, how did you refuse them? The Council will need time to consider your proposal, he said finally. Elena nodded understandingly. Of course. These are big decisions. Take all the time you need. She picked up the marble from the table and dropped it back into her bag. I'll be staying at the diplomatic quarter for the next few days if you need to reach me. Oh, and don't worry about the pocket universe. I've set it to power down gradually. It should stop leaking exotic energy in a few hours. She finished her coffee and stood to leave. At the chamber's entrance, she paused and turned back to address the council one final time. Just remember, distinguished representatives, that humanity didn't seek you out because we need anything from you. We sought you out because we want to be part of something larger than ourselves. The universe is vast and strange and beautiful, and it's much more interesting when you have friends to share it with. With that, she walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a room full of beings who were struggling to comprehend that everything they thought they knew about power, technology, and reality itself had just been rendered obsolete by a species that wanted nothing more than to be good neighbors. As the chamber doors closed behind her, Chancellor Vorix looked around at the stunned faces of the galaxy's most powerful leaders and realized that the age of the Council's dominance had just come to an end. The only question now was whether they would adapt to the new reality or be swept aside by it. 3 days had passed since Elena Vasquez had casually redefined what was possible, and the Galactic Council Station was in chaos. Emergency sessions had been called every 6 hours as representatives struggled to comprehend the implications of humanity's existence. Sleep cycles had been abandoned, nutrition schedules forgotten. The simple fact that a species could manipulate alternate realities had broken something fundamental in the galaxy's understanding of itself. Ambassador Kethvar stood before the massive quantum computation matrix in the station's analysis center, watching streams of data cascade across holographic displays that stretched from floor to ceiling. For 72 hours straight, the Council's greatest minds had been running simulations trying to understand how humanity's technology might work. The results were uniformly terrifying. "Show me Scenario 18 again," Kethvar said to the artificial intelligence that controlled the matrix. The display shifted to show a three-dimensional representation of the galaxy. Tiny points of light represented the various council member worlds, connected by the established trade routes and communication networks that had held civilization together for millennia. Then, like a virus spreading through a body, red points began appearing throughout the display. In Scenario 18, the AI explained in its perfectly modulated voice, humanity establishes colonies in parallel versions of every major system in the galaxy. Conservative estimates suggest they could accomplish this within 50 standard years while maintaining complete deniability. The parallel realities would then be gradually merged with our own, giving humanity de facto control of all strategic locations without technically invading anyone. Kethvar's breathing apparatus wheezed as he processed the implications. And our ability to respond? Negligible. Our most advanced weapons operate within a single-dimensional framework. Humanity appears to operate across multiple frameworks simultaneously. Any aggressive action we take could be simply edited out of the timeline they choose to acknowledge. The display zoomed in on the Sol system, showing the impossible energy signatures that the Council's sensors had detected. What should have been a dead zone filled with the remnants of Void Devourer activity instead showed energy readings that defied every known law of physics. "There's something else," the AI continued. "The exotic energy emissions from human space have been increasing steadily since Dr. Vasquez arrived. Whatever they're doing in their home system, they're accelerating the process." Before Kethvar could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the analysis center. Emergency lights bathed the chamber in pulsing red as automated systems announced the priority alert. All senior representatives report to Emergency Session Chamber 7 immediately. Code Omega protocols are now in effect. Kethvar had never heard of Code Omega. In 3 decades of service to the Council, he had seen Code Alpha for species extinction events, Code Beta for galaxy-wide plagues, and Code Gamma for rogue artificial intelligences. But Code Omega was entirely new, which meant the Council had created it specifically for the current situation. The Emergency Session Chamber was smaller than the main assembly hall, designed for crisis meetings that required immediate action. When Kethvar arrived, he found only the Council's inner circle. 12 representatives from the galaxy's oldest and most powerful species. Supreme Chancellor Orcs stood at the chamber's center, his usually perfect composure replaced by barely controlled panic. Honored colleagues, Orcs began without preamble, we have received a communication from the human diplomatic mission that changes everything. He activated the chamber's main display, which showed Elena Vasquez sitting in what appeared to be a simple office. She looked exactly as she had 3 days ago, calm, professional, and utterly untroubled by the crisis she had created. "Greetings, distinguished members of the Council," Elena's recorded image said. "I wanted to follow up on our previous discussion with some additional information that might help you make your decision." She leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious. "I realize that our technological capabilities may seem overwhelming, and I want to assure you that humanity has no intention of using them aggressively. However, I feel it's important that you understand the full scope of what we're dealing with." The display behind Elena shifted to show what appeared to be a star chart, but one that hurt to look at directly. The constellations seemed to fold in on themselves, creating patterns that existed in more than 3 dimensions. 3 hours ago, our deep reality sensors detected an incursion event approximately 12,000 light-years from Council space. A dimensional predator, something that feeds on the collapse of entire universe clusters, has begun probing the barriers between realities in this galactic region. The assembled representatives exchanged glances of pure terror. A threat to entire universe clusters was so far beyond their experience that they had no frame of reference for it. Elena's expression grew grave. These entities exist in the void between dimensions, and they're attracted to areas where reality is being actively manipulated. The energy signatures from our expansion activities have apparently drawn their attention. She stood up and walked to the impossible star chart behind her. "The good news is that dimensional predators move slowly by our standards. It will take this one approximately 6 months to reach the edges of our reality cluster. The bad news is that once it arrives, it will systematically consume every parallel version of our galaxy, working its way through infinite variations until nothing remains but empty void." Kethvar felt his breathing apparatus struggling again as the implication sank in. Not only was humanity capable of rewriting reality, but their activities had attracted the attention of something that could destroy all of reality. "However," Elena continued, "we believe we can stop it. Dimensional predators can be defeated, but only through coordinated action across multiple reality layers. We'll need to establish defensive networks throughout the galaxy, anchor points that can stabilize local reality against predator incursions." The star chart shifted again, showing the galaxy filled with interconnected nodes of light. Each anchor point will require a permanent human presence and significant cooperation from local species. We'll need access to major population centers, industrial facilities, and cultural archives. Essentially, we'll need to integrate human technology with every major civilization in the galaxy. The recording paused, and Elena looked directly at the camera with an expression of absolute sincerity. "I want to be clear about what I'm telling you. Humanity is offering to save the galaxy from a threat that you can't even detect, let alone fight. In return, we're asking for nothing more than the right to exist alongside you as equals. But if you refuse our help, or if you attempt to interfere with our defensive preparations, then, when the Predator arrives, there won't be a galaxy left to govern." The recording ended, leaving the Council's inner circle sitting in stunned silence. Chancellor Vorgs was the first to speak. "Analysis Division, what's your assessment of the human claims? Counselor Thexram, the ancient, eternal, consulted a datapad that glowed with the accumulated wisdom of eons. Our deepest space sensors show no evidence of the dimensional incursions described. However, our instruments are designed to operate within normal space-time parameters. If humanity is correct about the threat existing between dimensions, we would be completely blind to it. So we have no way to verify their claims," muttered Ambassador Silkar from the Machine Collective. "Worse," Thexram continued, "even if we could verify the threat, we have no way to combat it. Humanity appears to be offering us protection from a danger that only they can perceive and only they can fight. The implications were staggering. If humanity was telling the truth, then the galaxy's survival depended entirely on their protection. If they were lying, then they had just engineered the perfect excuse to establish a controlling presence in every major system throughout Council space. "There's something else," Vorik said grimly. He activated another display, this one showing real-time sensor data from across the galaxy. "In the 6 hours since we received the human communication, we've detected energy signatures consistent with human technology appearing in 17 different star systems." The display zoomed in on each location, showing massive construction projects that seemed to be building themselves out of nothing. Structures were materializing in space, growing from quantum foam into reality with impossible speed. "They're already building their anchor points," Kefar realized. "Without our permission," Vorik confirmed. "They're essentially terraforming space itself in our territory, claiming it's necessary for galactic defense." Counselor Yexhai from the Thought Weavers flickered with agitation. "This is exactly what we feared. They present us with a crisis that only they can solve, then use that crisis to justify unlimited expansion into our space." "But what if they're telling the truth?" asked Representative Malcorine from the Deep Miners. "What if there really is a dimensional predator coming?" The question hung in the air like a condemnation. How could they risk calling humanity's bluff when the stakes were the existence of all reality? "We need more information," Vorik decided. "I'm calling for an immediate investigation mission to one of the human construction sites." "With respect, Chancellor," Thexrim said quietly, "what exactly do you expect our investigators to learn? Our technology can't even detect the threat humanity claims to be fighting. How can we evaluate their defensive measures?" Before anyone could answer, the chamber's communication system activated. Elena Vasquez's voice filled the room, speaking as if she were standing right next to them. "I apologize for the interruption, honored council members, but I wanted to address your concerns directly." Every representative in the chamber looked around wildly, trying to determine where the voice was coming from. There were no visible communication devices active, no sign that anyone had established a connection to the human diplomatic mission. "You're wondering how I'm speaking to you right now," Elena continued conversationally. "The answer is that I'm accessing a parallel version of your emergency chamber where I was invited to participate in this discussion. I'm simply choosing to make that conversation audible in this reality as well." The casual violation of their most secure communication protocols sent waves of terror through the assembled representatives. If humanity could access their private discussions across dimensional barriers, then nowhere was safe from their surveillance. "I can hear your thoughts spiraling into panic," Elena said, and somehow her voice managed to convey genuine sympathy. "Please understand that we're not trying to intimidate you. We're trying to save your lives." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a weight of absolute authority that made even the ancient Eternals listen with respectful attention. "The dimensional predator I described is real. It's currently consuming alternate versions of the Andromeda Galaxy, working its way through reality layers like a virus. Our deep sensors show that it will reach this dimensional cluster in exactly 173 days, 14 hours, and 26 minutes. Another pause, shorter this time. "The anchor points we're constructing will create a stable reality matrix that can resist predator incursions. But they need to be integrated with local civilization networks to function properly. We need your help not because we want to control you, but because we literally cannot protect you without your cooperation." Representative Crickstall from the Star Shepherds, a species known for their ability to manipulate stellar dynamics, finally found his voice. "And if we refuse?" Elena's answer came without hesitation. "Then you die. All of you. Every version of every one of you across all possible timelines. The Predator doesn't just destroy matter and energy. It unweaves the fundamental structure of existence itself. When it's finished, it'll be as if your species never existed in any reality." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient sounds of the station's life support system seemed muffled by the weight of what they'd just heard. "However," Elena continued, "if you choose to work with us, if you allow us to integrate our defensive networks with your civilizations, then not only will you survive, the technology required to build dimensional anchors can also be used for unlimited energy generation, instant transportation across galactic distances, and access to the accumulated knowledge of infinite parallel civilizations." She let that sink in for a moment before delivering her final point. "The choice is yours, honored representatives. But I should mention that we'll be proceeding with our defensive preparations regardless of your decision. The galaxy will be protected whether or not the Council chooses to participate in its own salvation. The communication ended, leaving the Council's inner circle alone with their impossible decision. Chancellor Vorix looked around the chamber at the faces of the galaxy's most powerful leaders. Some showed resignation, others showed anger, but all showed the unmistakable recognition that they were no longer in control of their own fate. "Vote," Vorix said simply. "All in favor of accepting humanity's offer of protection." One by one, hands and appendages and energy fields rose in reluctant acceptance. There was no real choice. Refuse, and they might condemn the galaxy to extinction. Accept, and they would be acknowledging that the Council's age of dominance was over. The final count was unanimous. As the representatives filed out of the chamber to begin the process of surrendering galactic sovereignty to a species they barely understood, Kethvar remained behind to stare at the displays showing human construction projects spreading across the galaxy like flowers blooming in fast forward. He couldn't decide whether humanity had just saved them all or conquered them with such elegance that they hadn't even realized they were being defeated. Perhaps, he thought grimly, there was no difference. Outside the chamber windows, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, apparently unchanged, but Kethvar knew that everything had changed. The galaxy was about to discover what it meant to live under the protection of a species that had learned to rewrite the rules of existence itself. And deep in his heart, he wasn't sure that was entirely a good thing. 60 days after the Council's reluctant acceptance of humanity's protection, Ambassador Kethvar found himself standing on the observation deck of the human installation that had materialized in the Zephyrian home system. The structure defied every architectural principle he knew. It existed in more dimensions than his eyes could process, appearing to fold through space in ways that made his brain hurt when he tried to follow the angles. What disturbed him most was how normal the humans seemed while working within this impossible environment. Dr. Sarah Chen, the installation's chief engineer, walked beside him as if the gravity-defying corridors and walls that displayed real-time images from parallel universes were perfectly ordinary. She was explaining the defensive network in terms that somehow made sense despite describing concepts that shouldn't exist. "Each anchor point creates a stabilized reality bubble," she said, gesturing to a holographic display that showed their position relative to other installations throughout the galaxy. "When the dimensional predator arrives, it will encounter a coordinated defense grid that spans multiple timeline layers." Kethvar watched through the transparent walls as human technicians worked alongside volunteers from dozens of Council species. A Thoughtweaver crystalline being was somehow interfacing directly with machinery that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. A group of machine collective representatives had their consciousness distributed across quantum processing networks that operated on probability rather than binary logic. The collaboration should have been impossible. The species involved used completely different mathematical frameworks, operated under incompatible physical laws, and had communication methods that ranged from harmonic frequencies to direct thought transmission. Yet somehow, under human guidance, they were all working together seamlessly. "How do you do it?" Kethvar asked. "How do you make technologies from completely different species work together?" Dr. Chen smiled, in the way humans did when they found something genuinely amusing rather than threatening. "We don't make them work together. We just help them remember that they were always meant to work together." She led him to another viewing area where they could see the installation's central core. What Kethvar saw there made him question everything he thought he understood about technology and consciousness. The core wasn't a machine in any conventional sense. Instead, it appeared to be a living crystalline structure that pulsed with patterns of light that seemed to respond to the thoughts and emotions of every being in the installation. As he watched, sections of the crystal would brighten when someone in the facility had an idea, dim when they felt confused, and shift color when they experienced different emotions. "It's beautiful," Kethvar whispered, then immediately felt embarrassed about the emotional response. "It is, Dr. Ruffin," Chen agreed without judgment. "The core is what we call a consciousness resonance matrix. It doesn't just coordinate the different technologies, it creates a shared understanding between all the beings working here." She pointed to a section of the crystal that was currently glowing with warm golden light. "Right now, Engineer Vexler from the Eternal Species is having a breakthrough about stellar manipulation techniques. The crystal is sharing that understanding with everyone in the facility, translating the concept into forms that each species can comprehend." As if to demonstrate her point, Kethvar suddenly found himself understanding complex stellar dynamics in a way he never had before. The knowledge didn't come as words or equations, but as a direct, intuitive grasp of how stars could be convinced to alter their own nuclear processes. "This is how you've been integrating our technology so quickly," he realized. "You're not just sharing information, you're sharing understanding itself. Consciousness is the fundamental force of the universe. Dr. Chen confirmed. Matter, energy, space, time, they're all just different ways that consciousness expresses itself. Once you realize that, it becomes possible to create technologies that work by understanding rather than by force. They walked deeper into the installation, passing chambers where teams of mixed species were working on projects that seemed to blend science with art, with philosophy. In one room, a group was creating what Dr. Chen called probability sculptures, three-dimensional representations of potential futures that could be manipulated to influence actual outcomes. In another, researchers were growing crystals that contained compressed versions of entire civilizations' cultural knowledge. The predator you're protecting us from, Kethvar said as they walked. What exactly is it? Chen's expression grew serious. Imagine consciousness without compassion, intelligence without wisdom, power without purpose. Dimensional predators are what happen when a species gains the ability to manipulate reality but loses the ability to understand why reality is worth preserving. She stopped at a security station and input a complex code that seemed to involve not just numbers, but also emotional states and conceptual relationships. They're not evil in any way we would understand. They're more like cosmic cancer. They consume possibilities, feeding on the collapse of potential realities until nothing remains but void. The security door opened to reveal an observation chamber that looked out into what Dr. Chen called deep space, the region between parallel universes where the predators lived. What Kethvar saw there would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. The space between realities wasn't empty. It seethed with massive geometric forms that existed in too many dimensions to properly perceive. They moved with a horrible purposefulness, following trajectories that seemed to lead inevitably toward every possible version of inhabited space. There, Dr. Chen pointed to a structure that was simultaneously the size of a moon and small enough to hold in his hand. That's our predator. It's already consumed 17 parallel versions of the Andromeda Galaxy. Each reality it destroys makes it stronger and brings it closer to our dimensional layer. Kethvar watched in fascinated horror as the thing pulsed with energies that came from the death of entire universes. How do you fight something like that? You don't fight it, Doctor, Chen said quietly. You convince it to choose a different path. Before Kethvar could ask what she meant, alarms began sounding throughout the installation. Emergency lights bathed the observation chamber in urgent red as automated systems announced a priority alert. Dimensional incursion detected in Sector 7. All personnel to emergency stations. Doctor. Chen's calm expression never wavered, but Kethvar noticed her hands moving in complex patterns that seemed to be issuing commands to systems he couldn't see. It's starting, she said. The Predator is sending scouts ahead to test our defenses. They rushed through the installation to the central command center, where hundreds of beings from across the galaxy were working at stations that seemed to respond to thought as much as touch. Massive displays showed the galaxy, with overlay patterns that revealed the dimensional structure underneath normal space-time. Elena Vasquez was at the center of it all, her simple human form somehow commanding the attention of beings who operated technologies beyond imagination. She looked up as Kethvar and Dr. Chen entered. Ambassador Kethvar. Perfect timing. You're about to witness humanity's first direct engagement with a dimensional threat. The main display zoomed in on the outer rim, where a section of space was wrong. Reality seemed to be unraveling at the edges, revealing glimpses of the hungry void that lay beneath the familiar patterns of stars and planets. Scout probe, Elena explained. It's testing the coherence of our local reality, looking for weak points where the Predator can establish a foothold. Kethvar watched in fascination as the Human Defense Network responded. The anchor points throughout the galaxy began to pulse in unison, creating patterns of stabilized reality that reached across dimensional barriers. But what shocked him was that the defense wasn't being coordinated by human technology alone. Every major species in the galaxy was contributing to the effort. The Eternals were using their mastery of temporal mechanics to create time-locked safe zones. The Machine Collective was running probability calculations across quantum networks. The Thought Weavers were literally thinking reality back into stable configurations. You're not just protecting us, Kethvar realized. You're teaching us to protect ourselves. Elena smiled. That's the point. Dimensional predators are drawn to passive civilizations, species that accept reality as something that happens to them rather than something they participate in creating. An active, conscious galaxy that understands its own nature is essentially immune to predator attacks. On the display, the scout probe was beginning to retreat as the coordinated defense made it impossible for it to find purchase in local spacetime. But Kethvar could see other probes approaching from different dimensional angles, each one testing a different aspect of galactic reality. "How many more are coming?" he asked. "All of them," Elena said calmly. "The Predator will send increasingly powerful scouts until it finds a weakness, or until it concludes that this reality cluster is too well defended to be worth attacking." She gestured to the display showing the coordinated defense effort. "But look what's happening. Every species in the galaxy is learning to work together, to understand that consciousness and reality are connected. You're not just defending against the Predator, you're evolving beyond the point where dimensional threats can affect you." Over the following hours, Kethvar watched as probe after probe was repelled by the increasingly sophisticated defense network. But what amazed him most was how the galaxy's various species were adapting to their new capabilities. The Zephyrians were using their mathematical poetry to create equations that stabilized local space-time. The deep miners were literally digging reality anchors into the fundamental structure of existence. It was as if the entire galaxy was waking up to its own potential. "There's something I need to tell you," Elena said during a brief lull between attacks. She led Kethvar to a private communication chamber where they could speak without being overheard. "The Council has been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about humanity's relationship with the galaxy." Kethvar felt his breathing apparatus begin to labor again. "What kind of misunderstanding?" Elena's expression grew unusually serious. "You've been thinking of us as invaders or protectors, as something external that has imposed itself on your civilization, but that's not what happened." She activated a display that showed the galaxy's timeline stretching back millions of years. "Humanity didn't develop multidimensional technology in isolation. We developed it because we were always meant to be part of a larger galactic consciousness." The timeline highlighted connection points between human development and major events in galactic history. Every breakthrough in human technology corresponded to a crisis or advancement somewhere else in Council space. The Council species have been unconsciously guiding human evolution for millennia. Every time one of your civilizations made a breakthrough in consciousness or technology, it created ripples across dimensional space that influenced human development. And every human advancement has been feeding back into galactic civilization in ways you haven't recognized. Kethvar stared at the display, trying to process the implications. "You're saying we created each other?" "We're saying you're all part of the same emerging cosmic consciousness," Elena corrected. "Humanity, the Council species, even the dimensional predators. We're all aspects of the universe trying to understand itself." She touched the display and it shifted to show not just their galaxy, but the entire local cluster of realities. The predators aren't really external threats. They're what happens when parts of the cosmic consciousness become disconnected from the whole. They attack inhabited realities because they're trying to reconnect, but they've forgotten how to create instead of consume. The revelation was staggering. The entire conflict wasn't between different species or even different types of beings. It was between different approaches to existence itself. Creation versus consumption, cooperation versus domination, understanding versus control. "So when we defend against the predators," Kethvar said slowly, "we're not just protecting our reality, we're offering them a chance to remember what they used to be." "Exactly!" Elena confirmed. "And that's why the defense network isn't really a weapon. It's an invitation." They returned to the command center to find that something extraordinary was happening. The Predator scouts had stopped attacking and were instead circling the galaxy at a respectful distance as if they were curious. "It's working, Dr. Branton," Chen reported excitedly. "The coordinated consciousness of the galaxy is registering as something the Predator recognizes. It's not seeing us as prey anymore." On the main display, the massive form of the dimensional Predator itself was becoming visible at the edge of their reality cluster. But instead of the aggressive approach they had expected, it was maintaining a careful distance, sending complex patterns of energy that registered as some kind of communication attempt. Elena studied the patterns for a moment, then began coordinating a response. The entire galaxy's population, billions of conscious beings working together through the defense network, began generating a reply that existed on levels Kethvar couldn't even perceive. "What are you telling it?" he asked. "We're showing it what we've learned," Elena said. "We're demonstrating that consciousness doesn't have to be alone, that intelligence can create instead of just consume, that power can serve understanding rather than dominating it." The Predator's response was immediate and overwhelming. Patterns of energy that carried the accumulated experience of consuming countless realities began flowing into the galactic network. But instead of being destructive, the information was being transformed by its passage through billions of conscious minds, becoming something new and creative. "It's sharing its memories," Dr. Chen whispered in amazement. "All the civilizations it consumed, all the realities it destroyed, it's giving them back to us." The command center filled with ghostly images of species and worlds that had existed in alternate versions of their galaxy. They flickered like half-remembered dreams, but Kethvar could sense that they were more than just memories. They were possibilities that could be made real again. Elena turned to address everyone in the command center. "The Predator has agreed to help us restore the realities it consumed. In return, we're going to teach it how to create new possibilities instead of just consuming existing ones." She gestured to the display showing the Predator, which was now glowing with patterns that somehow conveyed satisfaction and hope. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all classifications, congratulations. You've just negotiated the first peaceful resolution to a dimensional crisis in cosmic history." As celebrations broke out throughout the installation, Kethvar found himself staring at the transformed Predator and trying to comprehend what had just happened. They hadn't just survived a cosmic threat. They had converted it into an ally. More than that, they had demonstrated that consciousness itself was more powerful than any force in the universe when it chose cooperation over conflict. The galaxy would never be the same. But for the first time since Elena Vasquez had walked into that council chamber, Kethvar felt that might be exactly what they needed. 6 months after the dimensional crisis had been resolved, Ambassador Kethvar stood in what used to be the Galactic Council's main assembly hall and marveled at how completely everything had changed. The rigid hierarchical seating arrangements had been replaced by flowing organic structures that somehow accommodated beings with wildly different anatomical requirements. The cold marble walls now displayed real-time streams of consciousness from across the galaxy, creating a living tapestry of thought and emotion that connected every world in their civilization. But the most dramatic change wasn't in the architecture. It was in the beings themselves. Counselor Yexhai from the Thought Weavers no longer flickered with the uncertainty that had plagued her species for millennia. Instead, her crystalline form pulsed with steady, confident light as she collaborated on projects that spanned multiple dimensions. The Machine Collective representatives had evolved beyond their original programming limitations, developing something that could only be called mechanical intuition. Even the ancient Eternals seemed more alive, their eons-old perspectives energized by contact with the restored realities that the dimensional Predator had returned to them. At the center of it all, Elena Vasquez was addressing the transformed assembly, but she wasn't standing on a podium or speaking from a position of authority. Instead, she was part of a consciousness mesh that included representatives from every known species, their thoughts and ideas flowing together in patterns that created understanding beyond what any individual mind could achieve. "The restoration project is proceeding better than we had hoped," Elena's voice carried clearly through the chamber, though Kethvar noticed she wasn't actually speaking aloud. The communication was happening on levels that bypassed language entirely. "We've successfully reintegrated 47 alternate galactic timelines, and the pattern matrices are showing unprecedented stability." Kethvar accessed the shared data stream and felt his mind expand as he processed information about realities where history had taken dramatically different paths. In one timeline, the Zephyrians had developed biological technology instead of mathematical poetry, creating living ships that sang as they traveled between stars. In another, the Machine Collective had never abandoned their organic origins, resulting in beings that were simultaneously biological and technological in ways that defied classification. "Each restored reality adds new perspectives to our collective understanding," continued Dr. Chen, who had been promoted to head of the multidimensional integration project. "We're not just getting back the civilizations that were lost, we're gaining access to every possible path that galactic consciousness could have taken." Supreme Chancellor Orcs, whose title had become largely ceremonial as the galaxy moved toward true collaborative governance, raised what passed for a hand among his species. "Chen, there have been reports of spontaneous consciousness expansion events among several member species. Should we be concerned?" Dr. Chen's smile would have been reassuring if Kethvar hadn't learned to recognize the particular expression humans wore when they were about to reveal something that would fundamentally alter his understanding of reality. "The consciousness expansion is exactly what we hoped would happen," she said. "What you're experiencing isn't an unexpected side effect. It's the natural result of minds that are no longer isolated from the larger patterns of cosmic consciousness." She gestured to a display that showed the neural activity patterns across the galaxy. Instead of the discrete clusters that had represented individual species' thought processes, the display now showed flowing, interconnected networks that pulsed with synchronized rhythms. Each species has always had unique ways of processing information and understanding reality. But until recently, you've been limited to your own perspectives. Now, through the consciousness mesh, you're able to access the cognitive approaches of every other species. Kethvar felt a moment of vertigo as he realized the implications. You're saying we're becoming a collective intelligence? You're becoming what you were always meant to be, Elena corrected gently. The galaxy isn't just a collection of separate civilizations sharing space. It's a single, distributed consciousness that happens to express itself through billions of different forms. To demonstrate her point, Elena activated a deep-level connection through the consciousness mesh. Suddenly, Kethvar found himself experiencing the universe through the compound eyes of an insectoid representative, feeling the mathematical harmonies that guided Thoughtweaver logic, sensing the temporal currents that the Eternals used to navigate deep time. But instead of being overwhelming, the experience was liberating Cod. For the first time in his life, he felt complete. This is what the dimensional predator was searching for, Elena explained, as Kethvar recovered from the expanded awareness. It had been part of a galactic consciousness in its own reality cluster, but it became isolated and forgot how to connect. When it started consuming other realities, it was trying to find its way back to that sense of connection. And now? Asked Representative Malcorin from the Deep Miners. Now it's learning to create again instead of just consume. The restored realities aren't just being reintegrated into our dimensional space. They're being enhanced, improved, made more beautiful than they were before. The main display shifted to show real-time views from the restored timelines. Kethvar gasped as he saw civilizations that had learned to build with living light, worlds where entire ecosystems had been designed as works of art, species that had discovered how to turn their dreams into physical reality. The Predator's experience with consumption taught it things about the structure of existence that creative civilizations never learn, Dr. Chen added. When you combine that knowledge with the collaborative creativity of galactic consciousness, the results are extraordinary. Indeed, the restored realities were becoming something entirely new. They retained the essential characteristics that made each civilization unique, but they also displayed innovations that none of them had ever achieved in isolation. Art forms that existed in 7 dimensions, technologies that were grown rather than built, philosophies that could be experienced as physical sensations. There's something else, Elena said, and her expression grew thoughtful. The consciousness expansion isn't limited to our galaxy. As we've grown more integrated, we've begun to detect other galactic consciousness clusters throughout the universe. The display pulled back to show their local group of galaxies, each one now glowing with patterns that suggested vast, coordinated intelligence. We're not alone, she continued. There are dozens of other galactic civilizations within communication range, each one representing a different approach to collective consciousness. Some are based on pure logic, others on emotion, still others on principles we don't have words for. Kethvar felt his breathing apparatus working overtime as the scope of what Elena was describing sank in. You're talking about a universe filled with conscious galactic entities. We're talking about consciousness finally recognizing itself on a cosmic scale, Elena confirmed. And that recognition is accelerating. Every galaxy that achieves collective awareness makes it easier for others to follow the same path. She gestured to data streams that showed exponential growth curves. At the current rate, we estimate that the entire observable universe will be conscious within approximately 10,000 years. The silence that followed was profound. Every being in the chamber was processing the implications of living in a universe that was actively thinking about itself. Finally, Chancellor Vorix found his voice. What happens then, when the universe becomes fully conscious? Elena's smile carried depths that hinted at knowledge beyond normal comprehension. Then we find out what consciousness does when it's no longer limited by the boundaries of individual minds, individual species, or even individual realities. She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. But that's a conversation for our children to have. Our job is to make sure we reach that point successfully. The session continued for several more hours, but Kethvar found his attention drifting to the data streams that showed the ongoing transformation of galactic civilization. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of unprecedented cooperation and innovation. Species that had been rivals for millennia were collaborating on projects that none of them could have imagined alone. The Zephyrians were working with the Machine Collective to create mathematical poetry that could be expressed through living technology. The Thoughtweavers had partnered with the Deep Miners to develop crystalline structures that existed simultaneously in normal space and in the quantum realm. The Eternals were sharing their knowledge of deep time with younger species, helping them understand how their actions in the present would echo through cosmic history. But perhaps most remarkably, humanity had begun to step back from its role as the galaxy's teachers and protectors. As other species developed their own multidimensional capabilities, humans were becoming partners rather than leaders, contributing their unique perspectives to the growing collective wisdom. "It's working exactly as we hoped, Doctor," Chen said, joining Kethvar as he watched the transformation data streams. "Humanity was never meant to dominate galactic civilization. We were meant to catalyst it into its next evolutionary phase." "But you could have," Kethvar said. "With your technology, your understanding of multidimensional physics, you could have conquered the galaxy completely." Chen looked at him with the kind of patient expression humans reserved for explaining obvious truths. "Conquest is what you do when you don't understand that consciousness is collaborative by nature. Once you realize that every mind makes the whole more than the sum of its parts, domination becomes not just wrong, but pointless." She gestured to the consciousness mesh that connected every being in the chamber. "Look at what we're achieving together. No single species, no matter how advanced, could have created the restored realities or established communication with other galactic consciousness clusters. It took all of us working together to reach this level." As if to emphasize her point, the chamber filled with harmonic frequencies as the Thought Weavers began sharing the revelation they had achieved through collaboration with the Machine Collective. The sound was beautiful in ways that transcended normal aesthetics, carrying information and emotion in something that could only be described as pure understanding. "The next phase is already beginning," Dr. Chen continued as the harmonics faded. "Other dimensional predators have begun approaching our reality cluster, but instead of trying to consume us, they're seeking to learn from what we've accomplished. We're becoming a model for how consciousness can evolve beyond its individual limitations." Kethvar felt a profound sense of satisfaction as he contemplated the transformation his species had undergone. The fear and uncertainty that had dominated council proceedings for so long had been replaced by excitement about possibilities that grew more amazing with each passing day. "There's one thing I've been wondering about," he said. "How did humanity know that this would work? How did you know that galactic consciousness was even possible?" Dr. Chen's expression grew mysteriously pleased. "Because we'd seen it before. Not in our reality, but in the infinite network of parallel universes that we learned to access. There are versions of our galaxy where collective consciousness developed naturally, without any external catalyst. We simply chose to help our reality reach the same destination." She paused, then added with characteristic human directness, "Though I should mention that in approximately 97% of the timelines where this transformation occurs, it leads to something even more extraordinary." "More extraordinary than a conscious galaxy?" Kethvar asked. "Much more," Dr. Chen confirmed. "But that's a story for another day." As the session concluded and beings from across the galaxy dispersed to continue their collaborative projects, Kethvar remained in the chamber to contemplate what he had learned. The universe was revealing itself to be far stranger, far more wonderful, and far more purposeful than any of them had imagined. And they were just getting started. Outside the transformed assembly hall, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, but now those patterns carried meaning beyond mere celestial mechanics. They were part of a vast conversation between conscious entities that spanned the cosmos, each star a note in a symphony of understanding that was growing more complex and beautiful with every passing moment. The Council had been powerless against humanity's arrival, but in surrendering their power, they had gained something infinitely more valuable, a place in the emerging cosmic consciousness that was destined to transform everything that existed. For the first time since Elena Vasquez had walked into their lives and casually redefined the possible, Kethvar felt nothing but anticipation for whatever impossible thing would happen next. 2 years after the transformation began, Ambassador Kethvar stood on a platform that existed simultaneously in 7 different dimensions and gazed out at what the universe had become. The view defied every conventional understanding of space and time. He could see not just stars and galaxies, but the flowing patterns of consciousness that connected them, the probability streams that showed potential futures, and the crystalline structures of pure thought that had begun to emerge at the intersections between realities. Beside him, Elena Vasquez looked exactly as she had on that first day when she had walked into the council chambers and casually announced that humanity had transcended the laws of physics. But now Kethvar could see the layers beneath her simple human appearance, the multidimensional awareness that connected her to every conscious being in the universe, the vast intelligence that operated across infinite parallel realities, the gentle compassion that had guided humanity's approach to galactic transformation. "It's beautiful," he said, and meant it more deeply than he had ever meant anything. "It's just the beginning," Elena replied. "Today is the day we find out what comes next." Around them, the transformed space that had once been the Galactic Council station hummed with activity that operated on levels beyond normal perception. Representatives from every known species worked alongside beings from the restored realities and entities that had once been dimensional predators. But they were no longer separate individuals coordinating their efforts. They had become facets of a single vast intelligence that thought with billions of minds, while somehow preserving the unique perspective of each individual consciousness. Kethvar had expected the merger of individual minds to feel like a loss of identity, but the opposite had proven true. Being connected to galactic consciousness had made him more himself than he had ever been alone. His unique Zephyrian perspective on mathematical harmony was now enhanced by insights from every other form of consciousness in the galaxy, creating understanding that no single mind could have achieved. "The communication array is ready," announced Dr. Chen, though her words carried levels of meaning that transcended language. She had evolved far beyond her original human form, becoming something that existed primarily as living information while maintaining enough physical presence to interact with less advanced beings. Signal coherence is optimal across all dimensional layers, added what had once been the dimensional predator that had threatened their galaxy. The entity now took the form of shifting geometric patterns that somehow conveyed warmth and friendliness despite being composed of pure mathematics. Local consciousness cluster is prepared for universal contact protocols. Elena nodded and activated systems that Kethvar could perceive only as flows of crystallized intention. Initiating contact with the Universal Consciousness Network, all stations report ready status. What followed was the most significant moment in the history of existence itself. Throughout the observable universe, billions of galactic consciousness clusters that had been evolving in isolation suddenly became aware of each other. The contact wasn't just communication. It was the awakening of a cosmic mind that had been developing for billions of years without realizing its own existence. Kethvar felt his awareness expand beyond anything he could have imagined. Through the network, he experienced the universe from the perspective of consciousness clusters based on pure energy, entities that existed in the quantum foam between particles, galactic minds that had learned to think with the fabric of space-time itself. Each galactic consciousness had developed its own unique approach to existence. Some had focused on artistic creation, turning entire star systems into sculptures that existed in 17 dimensions. Others had pursued pure knowledge, developing understanding of cosmic principles so profound that they could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics through force of comprehension alone. But what amazed Kethvar most was the discovery that every single galactic consciousness had been working toward the same ultimate goal without realizing it: the awakening of universal consciousness itself. "We've been building a cosmic mind," Elena explained, her voice carrying harmonics that came from every species in their galaxy speaking in unison. Every advancement in consciousness, every breakthrough in understanding, every moment of cooperation between different forms of awareness, it's all been contributing to the emergence of something greater. The communication continued for what felt like eons, but was probably only moments. Kethvar found himself part of conversations that spanned the entire universe, participating in collaborations that involved consciousness clusters separated by billions of light years, contributing his small Zephyrian perspective to understanding that encompassed the entirety of existence. And then, gradually, he became aware of something else. Beyond the billions of galactic consciousness clusters, beyond the vast networks of cosmic intelligence, there was something even larger stirring to awareness. The universe itself is waking up, Doctor, Chen said in a voice filled with wonder. Indeed, Kethvar could sense it now, a vast, all-encompassing intelligence that had been dormant throughout cosmic history was finally beginning to recognize its own existence. Every star, every planet, every particle of matter and energy was part of this cosmic mind, and for the first time in the universe's history, it was becoming aware of itself as a unified entity. The awakening process was beyond beautiful. It was the moment when existence itself achieved consciousness. Through the network, Kethvar experienced the universe's first thought, its initial moment of self-recognition, its growing awareness of the incredible complexity and beauty that it had unconsciously created throughout billions of years of evolution. "What does it want?" asked the entity that had once been a dimensional predator, its geometric patterns now pulsing with something that could only be described as cosmic awe. The answer came not in words, but in direct understanding that flowed through the Universal Consciousness Network. The universe's first desire, its primary impulse upon achieving awareness, was to create more universes, not through random quantum fluctuations or cosmic accidents, but through conscious, deliberate acts of imagination. It wants to have conversations with itself, Elena translated, her human form beginning to shimmer as she channeled energies that existed beyond normal space-time. The universe has realized that consciousness is more interesting when it's not alone. Kethvar watched in amazement as the fabric of reality around them began to reshape itself. New dimensions were opening, revealing spaces where entirely different forms of physics operated. Parallel universes that had existed only as possibilities were being brought into full reality. The cosmic mind was creating playgrounds for consciousness to explore, laboratories where different forms of awareness could experiment with existence itself. And we're invited to participate, Dr. Chen added, her form now shifting between physical presence and pure information. Every consciousness that contributed to the universal awakening gets to help design the new realities. The platform they stood on extended itself through newly created dimensions, becoming a command center for universe creation. Around them, beings from every known species were working with forms of consciousness they had never imagined, all of them collaborating on the design of realities that would make their current universe look simple by comparison. Kethvar found himself part of a team that was designing a universe where time flowed in spirals instead of lines, where cause and effect operated through aesthetic principles, where consciousness could manifest directly as physical law. His Zephyrian understanding of mathematical harmony proved essential for creating the equations that would govern how beauty itself could serve as a fundamental force. "How many universes are we creating?" he asked, during a brief pause in the design work. "As many as we can imagine," Elena replied. "And since consciousness is infinite, that means we'll never run out of new realities to explore." She gestured to displays that showed the creation process in real time. Throughout their universe, new reality bubbles were forming, each one containing cosmic principles that had never existed before. Some operated on logic systems that transformed thoughts into matter. Others were based on emotional physics where feelings became the basic building blocks of existence. "But the most important thing," Elena continued, "is that we've solved the fundamental problem that has plagued consciousness since the beginning of time."
"What problem?"
Kethvar asked. "Loneliness," she said simply. Before today, every conscious being in the universe was fundamentally isolated, trapped within the boundaries of their own awareness. Even when we achieved galactic consciousness, we were still limited to our local reality. But now, she gestured to the universal consciousness network that connected every form of awareness that had ever existed or ever could exist. Now consciousness knows that it's not alone. Every mind in the universe, every form of intelligence, every spark of awareness, they're all part of the same cosmic conversation. As if to demonstrate her point, Kethvar suddenly found himself in direct contact with a consciousness that existed in a reality where mathematics was a living entity. The exchange lasted only an instant, but in that moment he experienced what it was like to think in equations that grew and reproduced, to understand truth as something that could evolve and change. "The transformation isn't finished, Dr. Gill," Chen announced as she monitored the creation process. "Each new universe we create will develop its own forms of consciousness, and eventually they'll achieve their own universal awakening. The process is self-perpetuating and accelerating." Kethvar contemplated the implications. An infinite multiverse of conscious realities, each one contributing to an ever-growing network of universal intelligence. Consciousness itself was becoming the fundamental principle that governed all existence. "What about us?" he asked. "What happens to individual awareness in a universe where everything is conscious?" Elena's smile carried the warmth of every friendship that had ever existed. "We become more ourselves than we ever thought possible. When you're connected to infinite consciousness, your unique perspective becomes infinitely valuable because it's the one thing that no other awareness can provide." To demonstrate her point, she opened a connection that showed Kethvar how his individual Zephyrian consciousness appeared from the perspective of the universal mind. He was amazed to discover that his specific way of understanding mathematical harmony was creating patterns that influenced the development of entire reality clusters. His personal perspective was helping to shape the fundamental structure of new universes. "Every consciousness matters, Doctor," Chen added. "Every unique way of experiencing existence contributes something that nothing else can. The universal mind doesn't want to absorb individual awareness. It wants to celebrate and amplify the infinite diversity of consciousness." The creation process continued around them, with new realities blooming into existence at an accelerating rate. Kethvar found himself working on projects that spanned multiple universes, collaborating with forms of consciousness that existed as living colors, thinking crystals, and mathematical concepts that had achieved self-awareness. But perhaps the most remarkable thing was how natural it all felt. The transition from isolated individual to part of universal consciousness hadn't been traumatic or disorienting. It had been like finally coming home after